I'm delighted to be joined by Anthony Levy, who is the founder and chairman of Circularity First. Anthony, good morning. How are you?
I'm very well indeed, thanks. Looking forward to this long weekend. We've got celebrating our new monarch.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's a good chance for us to be discussing Circularity First because we met at the Digital City Festival, which was in Manchester, and a great conversation about the tech ecosystem there. But I think it's really important that we talk about sustainability and the tech sector as well. And you are the sustainability guy, essentially.
Yeah, I picked up this moniker, the sustainable IT guy. My team love it. And actually, it's quite a good, simple way of describing what I've spent the last 14 years of my life focusing on, I suppose.
Absolutely. Well, tell me a little bit about Circularity First then and what you do as an organization.
Okay, so Circularity First is an organization really purely focused on helping others become more sustainable in their use of IT. We provide organizations advisory, solutions and services to help them go on this journey. I think if we look around society, everyone's increasingly aware that we need to become more sustainable, but not that many people really know how to do that when it comes to IT. In fact, many don't even really understand where the impacts come from. So we'll take customers on a journey from awareness, understanding where those challenges and impacts are, helping them set the ambition, their goals, and actually build the plan to reduce that, putting in frameworks for governance and accountability, and finally, obviously, getting into action and changing things in that organization, not just incrementally, but meaningfully and in a measured way to help them become more sustainable.
And I think it's that sustainable way, but in a meaningful fashion as well. I think there's perhaps a perception that there's been conversation about this, but the action and activity and tracking progress hasn't been there in the past. Have you found that that's changing now?
It is, and I think it's all coming from this. It's coming from the right place, right? I think instinctively people feel like they should act. There's plenty of pressure from all stakeholders in organizations to act. So people want to work for more sustainable companies. Customers want to buy more sustainable products. Investors want to put their money in organizations that are trying to make a difference. And that's given the impetus for change, even before we talk about government intervention and other things. That's given the impetus for change. And I think there's been a willingness for CEOs and other leaders to put their hands up and set goals, sometimes even before they really understand perhaps the entire footprint, but that the ambition's right. But the gap that we see is the how. And I think as you dig into understanding where the impacts are, we move very quickly from thinking, certainly in technology terms, we start with energy use, an obvious one. It's tangible. We can see it on the bills. We know all our devices take energy. We might talk a little bit about waste and things like that, because again, that's tangible, it's physical. And then we realize, there's all these other impacts, what's often referred to in carbon terms as scope 3, everything that happens in the supply chain. And I think that's perhaps when we start to have a slightly tougher conversation, because, oh, right, okay, so it's not just moving my energy to renewables, it's not just putting recycling bins in and treating waste correctly. People understand there's a lot more. And I think that learning curve, we shouldn't feel bad about, but everyone's on that learning curve right now and starting to appreciate where these impacts are. And only then really can we lead into setting the goals and building the plan to reduce them.
And when you're speaking with companies, you said there about this being a learning curve. Obviously, many will be on a different journey as well. There'll be different points in that learning curve. But I suppose we're constantly, as individuals and as companies, on that curve as well. So the job's never done. Is that it? You can always make progress and make some changes.
Yeah, I guess I think if we think about society as a whole, it feels like a really big ask to get to what we call net zero emissions. But generally, we try to be a little bit less binary when we start with organizations. It's like understand the big impacts and start addressing them now, right? And I think it's easy to make quite a lot of progress in the short term. Obviously, getting to zero in anything, or getting down to as close as possible to zero, obviously there are some big questions for people to ask and answer, particularly in IT, because of the way culturally we're quite wedded to the concept of new functionality, new performance. When I want something different, I think new. And interestingly, that's not actually how the whole of society works. We'll trust the things we love the most in a used car, and we'll drive down the motorway at 70, 80 miles an hour, and trust that vehicle that maybe has been used for many years before we had our hands on it, that will keep us safe. But when we talk about technology, If we start to talk about things that are not new, people have a very different emotional response to that. Of course, we want the latest and greatest. That's how we be most efficient and most productive, right? So we have to challenge some quite strongly embedded cultural beliefs around technology when we want to get to the meaningful part of change.
And do you think there are companies that are doing that? They are really trying to tackle that and that cultural perception now, and trying to think about not just themselves but their position in society too.
Absolutely. And you know, so I think I mentioned at the beginning, I've been doing this for 14 years. At the beginning, no, you know, but a lot has changed over that time. And particularly in the last couple of years, I think there's a really strong awareness that any organization needs to do the right thing, not, you know, for all the stakeholders we talked about, not just for themselves, but for their customers, for their employees, for society as a whole. And the solutions are also kind of picking up pace as well. So like some solutions have been around a long time, but some things are just becoming apparent now that will really make quite big differences. And yeah, we work with some big telecommunications companies who are really adopting the kind of solutions that we promote and actually making them the default position. You asked me to introduce to the business. The reason why we're called Circularity First is how do we move the circular economy to become a primary reason to do something, like thinking about it in the first set of criteria when we're defining a solution, rather than having it as a little checkbox exercise we do at the end, which feels like sort of past as opposed to our present and our future when we really need to make it primary.
And you were just saying that you've been doing this for 14 years. So tell me a little bit about yourself and what, I suppose, what got you into the tech sector and what started that journey for you?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'm going to be telling my age a little bit, but when I was a young lad, home computers were just becoming a thing, you know, and quite a lot of my friends and peers were getting, you know, nice new shiny computers at home to ostensibly do homework on, but of course to play computer games, before consoles and all of that. And yeah, candidly, my family couldn't afford to buy me my own computer. But because of that cultural relationship with technology, that willingness to sort of throw or even give away technology that's old, I was able to build my own home computer at sort of 13 years old. Now, back then, it wasn't terribly difficult. We're talking about a motherboard, you stick line cards into it, you plug in hard disks, and, you know, so I'm not claiming I soldered all the chips on or anything like that, but I could, from the parts that other people were willing to give or throw away, I made my own home computer, and it worked, and it got me hooked. I couldn't believe that I could do that. And I can also, it sowed a seed of, how is it I could build this for basically for nothing? Why are people so quick to give it away? And that took me to go and study computer science at university. I left university as the internet bubble was building, so it's actually quite easy to get a job with a computer science degree, even though I didn't know that much about the internet, if I'm honest. But quickly learned I didn't know a lot about business. Went off to business school, started to learn about entrepreneurship and how to build my own business. Worked for a telecommunications company, and then had an opportunity to start my own business. And at that moment, I came across a program actually that was run by one of the big technology vendors where they were selling their own remanufactured equipment. And some of these dots started to join. Right, this is non-new technology, you know, that can deliver the same performance, the same solutions for customers at critically a lower cost, which mattered a lot in 2009 when we were in the big banking financial crisis. But for me, I was like, and there was sort of a building realization of, well, this is really sustainable. This is keeping technology in use for longer. So that's where we started. And I had a hypothesis that it'd be small to medium-sized businesses that would be interested in that, you know, aspiring users of this great technology. But actually, the bigger companies saw really quickly the benefit from a cost-saving point of view. But about 4 or 5 years ago, you know, it felt like the tide was changing. It felt like people were starting to want to understand the impact of technology, and actually wanted to measure it and reduce that impact. And that's really where we pushed sustainability to the forefront of our messaging, to the forefront of our strategy, and actually started to help customers go on this journey using all the use cases that we've had. I mean, we've deployed technologies on aircraft carriers, in critical care units in hospitals, in some of the largest telecommunications companies in the world. So lots of different ways of using technology and more sustainable approaches that were really relevant and measurable and obviously tangible for customers. And that's kind of where we find ourselves with now.
That's brilliant. And you were saying there about sort of 4 or 5 years ago, you sort of noticed this taking off. Was there a moment where you thought, "Gosh, this is changing here"? Actually, this you know, the argument is being won?
Yes, but I think it's a much slower change. It's a gradual change. So I think obviously there's the big societal shift. I think that's probably the most obvious shift. It's just generally you see it everywhere. You know, my team very used to me taking pictures of things like big billboards in railway stations where a brand is now presenting itself in a more sustainable way, talking about its impacts or how it's trying to reduce its impacts. That just wasn't really there 4 or 5 years ago. In IT terms, we're still moving. Yeah, we use the analogy, it's like a surfing analogy. You can kind of see the swell, you can see the wave over in the distance, but it's not here yet. But it is coming, and all the factors we talked about from different stakeholders, also what we're seeing from governments in terms of intervention, firstly reporting requirements, but what will come is some kind of carbon tax. That's definitely happening this year in Europe, and I'm sure the US and the UK will follow suit. So the stars are aligning, and we're seeing, as I said, other organizations and awareness pick up in this space, but it's still not the number one thing people worry about, and that's understandable. You know, we all live a bit here and now. We're worrying about money. A lot of people worry about the cost of living crisis. Organizations are worrying about, you know, their own pockets and how to manage an interesting economy. But you know, the more I go out to events, I was at the Economist Sustainability event a few weeks ago. Last week I was in Copenhagen at an event specifically around the circular economy. It's called the Loop Forum. You know, you've got to make sure you're stepping outside your own echo chamber. But you know, the companies that are wanting to go on this journey with us, that are, surprisingly, the leaders that I speak to, and I look at their business and I can, you know, there's no compelling reason for them to do this apart from it's the right thing. You know, they're profitable businesses that are doing very well, thank you very much. You know, they're just recognizing the societal need to do this and are trying to do the right thing. And what they're surprised about is how actually that also has positive commercial outcomes. You know, people often assume that becoming more sustainable is either going to be harder, somehow reduce the quality of what they have or what they use, or it's going to cost them a lot of money. And actually that's not our experience. So I think that is building a sort of positive cycle of, all right, I can do this, not just because it's the right thing. I can also do it because it's the right thing for my business.
Absolutely, yeah. And your business is based in the northwest of England, I believe.
Yes, so our UK headquarters are in Poynton, just outside of Manchester, and we've got a huge solar-powered facility, of course. I think around 16,000 square feet of space there for colleagues, but also because we handle a lot of physical technology, and we need quite a lot of space to operate there. But we're also in Aalborg in Denmark, and a couple of spots in the US as well, in California and Minneapolis in the US.
And so for you then, as founder, chairman of the company, what does a normal day look like? Are you in Manchester? Is it traveling about? Is it meeting with clients? Or is there no such thing as a normal day?
Well, no, because it's a good question, right? So I guess probably a normal day ideally starts with me taking my kids to school. You know, my wife runs her own business. We work extremely hard to operate as equals and partners in this crazy thing called life. So I'll try and take the kids to school. I'm very lucky. Their school is walking distance away. So I'll start with that. I'll probably check in with my CEO or my chief strategy officer at some point early in the morning, kind of on things that we're working on. I do quite a bit of this. I do quite a bit of kind of engagement on podcasts, video segments, or social media stuff. So that there's always a little bit of that in a day. I'm quite often preparing for something. So preparing for a certain type of meeting or preparing for an event. So that'd be reading articles, that'd be thinking through what I think is most relevant for the audience that I'm about to approach. Yes, I still try and be really hands-on. So in our engagements, when we're doing advisory work, I want to be in the room. I can't be in the room all the time, but I love to be in the room with clients, particularly with the CEOs, and talking about the journey we've been on. Because I mean, we started ourselves going through this journey before we tried to start saying, well, we'll have everyone else here. We went through our own change inside our organization to be sustainability led. So I love sitting with the CEOs. Particularly in the IT sector, I know the journey they're going through. We can anticipate some of the challenges, but there's always new things that come up. You know, their operating models will be different. The services and solutions they provide will be different. So there'll definitely be a bit of time for me, hopefully in a day, with a customer in some engagement. Yeah, but beyond that, yeah, as you said, the variance is I'll be off then the next day talking, I'll be on stage or face to face with the client, or working with the team on shaping a new proposition, something like that.
And what's the most exciting bit of the job? Because the job must have changed a bit as well. And I guess the bits that excite you must have changed too.
That's a really good question. I think for me, the excitement sort of changed over time, right? I think changing perceptions, actually moving from this, I only care about cost, to no, I do want to talk about the sustainability bit, and then empowering people to actually take action. This gap between, yeah, I need to do something and actually being able to do it, I think all the good stuff happens there between that, like taking someone's ambition and helping them turn it into reality, building the confidence. I mean, one of our clients, they've just essentially come out and announced their net zero goal, and they had been really hesitating, but we got in their corner, we started working the problem. You could see the confidence growing, and I got to speak at their sales conference, and you could see how the audience probably started maybe a little skeptical. Oh, it would be a good idea. That sounds like a good sales pitch, to realizing, wow, we can actually do something to help address society's greatest challenge. And you take the hardest, most rigid kind of salesperson who is perceived to only care about money, and they realize this is something that's important for their kids. This is something they can talk about with their friends. That isn't just pushing kit and selling products, this is something we can all get behind. And I think I really enjoyed that journey, that empowerment, that building confidence and getting people into action and excited about it. And then hearing their stories about what it means to them to actually be doing something meaningful rather than just pushing the latest and greatest technology.
Absolutely. I know when I speak with my own family and start to talk about technology, once you can make it relevant to them and their lives, and I don't think anybody is unaware of the climate challenges that we face and the impact on our environment. So I think it makes it more relevant than ever. But that's a pretty huge challenge as well. So how do you turn off and relax, Anthony? You could be worried about this 24/7.
Well, my wife works in the inclusion and diversity space, so between us, yeah, we're quite up on big social challenges. I tried to be a rugby player. I'm a failed professional athlete. I never managed to make it as a professional rugby player. But these days, at the ripe old age at 45, I decided to join a cycle racing team. So I have quite a large challenge trying to keep up with other cyclists who are younger, shorter, lighter, and more experienced on a bike than me. But we train very, very intensely. I think it's fair to say, I'll get up on a Wednesday at 4:30 in the morning, and we'll do, a very extreme kind of hour plus of exercise with them. We do other training sessions during the week. So cycling's one output. I love to spend time with my kids. I've got 2 young girls who are nuts. But I love just playing with them, wrestling with them, or taking them to things that they want to do. Yeah, I think
are they embracing technology as well then, given your love for technology?
So yes, but they also have to embrace it. They have to suck up the sustainability angles. So, first of all, we don't own a TV, so that's a bit weird. Any devices that we get in this house are normally remanufactured or refurbished. We don't get brand new stuff in this house, so they understand that that's part of the game. We actually, technology is quite prevalent. So actually, we try and counter that a little bit. We will probably prioritize going to the park or playing a game, or something that's non-tech related when we're together. Because at school, obviously they're on computers. Obviously sometimes we give them some downtime and they can watch a movie or a show on a laptop or something. But generally speaking, we're very conscious about maintaining a balance with technology. We want them to be technology confident, but we don't want them to get lost in it. Although that might be inevitable as they get older. We'll see.
I think you're entirely right, striking that balance there and making sure that kids see technology as a wonderful feature and as an enabler, but not just something that you should be glued to perhaps all the time or reliant on for every answer either.
Exactly.
But if you weren't doing your current job, what job would you love to do, or would you have loved to do? Would it be rugby?
So a professional sport is a young person's game, to be fair. Certainly as a young man, it was very much at the top of my list. I do love sport and I love to travel, but as an actual job, I think it links back to what I was saying before about enabling people. I do quite a bit of mentorship on the side. So I work with small business owners or startup founders to kind of really just try and share some of what I've learned along the way. And that's really rewarding. And I think if I was to do that as a full-time job, ideally helping social enterprises, you know, for profit organizations, but are doing a social good, I think that would be my sweet spot. And you know, I do a bit of it today. I could definitely enjoy doing that, and particularly with diverse leaders who perhaps don't always get the support because they've not naturally had those networks growing up. I get a real kick out of helping people build belief and move forward.
I think there's a really important part there where we have mentors who can inspire people and take an interest in them. And was there somebody who inspired you when you were growing up or starting the business, or somebody who took that interest in you, which made the difference?
So yes and no. You know, again, as a younger man, obviously there's certain athletes you look up to, but there's so many sort of fallen idols there. You know, I did at one point really look up to Lance Armstrong. This, you know, I lost my father to cancer when I was quite young, and then watching this athlete kind of beat cancer and go on to win, it's hard not to be deeply inspired by that story. And of course, you know, you peel back the layers of quite a lot of people we look up to. They're not always perfect. You know, none of us are. So I think that was in the earlier days. I've never had a kind of really structured long-term mentorship, but I did work with a particular guy at Cable and Wireless, which is the telecommunications company I work with, and he wasn't kind of ever present, but he'd just come in and throw kind of what felt like grenades at me at the time. Like, he famously said to me once, "If you don't move out of what I was in product management at the time and move into sales, I'll get you fired." Now, he said it all with smiles and stuff, but the challenge was good. I was comfortable when I was just doing the thing I was used to doing. And he said, no, you're good at talking and communicating, connecting with people. You should go and try your skills out in sales. And if he hadn't have done that, starting this business would have been even harder than it was. You know, at least I had some sales skills when I started this business. I mean, when you start a business, if you're the founder, you're going to be doing selling. It doesn't matter what you think you're going to be doing. You'll be selling to investors, or you'll be selling to clients. So you have to do selling. And so he's been kind of a gentle mentor that sort of dipped in and out and kind of thrown occasional hard suggestions or grenades at me to keep me moving forward. So his name's Stuart Smythe. He's a really good guy.
Stuart, if you're watching, you're responsible for some of this then. That's what you can say. And if you could go back and give your 16-year-old self some advice, maybe entering the workspace, what do you think you'd say to yourself?
That's such a good question if you think about it, because like our 16-year-old selves, we might not be terribly proud of ourselves at 16. I think for me, it's a bit about trusting instincts. You know, I think for a long time, I've looked to others who are arguably more experienced to come in and have the answers. When actually, when you've been, particularly as a founder, when you've been involved in every part of your organization, and you have so much tacit knowledge that you probably don't appreciate. So I think it would be to trust the instincts and to take action sooner in situations, to be bolder, more confident. And that's a very hard thing to convince a 16-year-old if they haven't been through it. But if I could somehow land that advice in my lap of just trust my instincts and be bold. And ultimately, actually, that's often what I'm saying to the people I mentor today. You know, what is your instinct? What do you think's happening here? What action do you need to take? How can you take that action definitively and swiftly?
I love that. That's great advice. Thinking ahead then, so we've thought back to 16-year-old self, but looking ahead, the technology sector we've discussed changing all the time, new innovations coming forward. Only this week we've seen lots of headlines about AI. What do you think are some of the most exciting, but some of the most challenging elements of the tech sector we need to be considering over the next 10 to 20 years?
So the biggest challenge I see is that the technology we're talking about, like devices, computers, software, whatever, is going to compete with the biggest thing we need to do from climate change point of view. It's going to compete for resources for the energy transition. It's, you know, even base things like steel, copper, and minerals like that, but also a lot of rare metals and minerals. And we only have so much of them. They're all finite resources. So we kind of have to do the energy transition, or we won't tackle the climate crisis. But of course, so much of our evolution as a species now is tied into technology. So what are we not going to do? So I think the big challenges there are thinking about what are we not going to do, you know, and you talked about what technology I think is most interesting, and I'm slightly tweaking your question, but I'd love it if we can, rather than assume that all technology needs to be changed, I'd love it if we can see more technology that's running today still running in 10 to 12 years' time. I'd love it to see if we found a way to be custodians of these resources, custodians of this technology. And of course, there are new technologies that we will need, but how do we not throw away everything each time we move forward? We can't keep doing that. It just isn't sustainable. It's the purest definition of sustainability. We only have finite resources. So we need to find a way to maximize the use of things. That doesn't mean everything, but how can we maximize the use of the majority of technology and keep all those resources for the really big, dramatic things that will massively make a difference to society? Because if we keep just ripping and replacing everything, there's just not going to be enough resource to do everything else we need to do to keep this planet livable, which I know is a bit of a dark sounding statement, but unfortunately it's factually true.
Absolutely, it is, yeah. And do you think there's more of an element that we need to be thinking for individuals as well as part of that, changing that mindset? We've talked a lot about companies, how we change that mindset, but changing the individual mindset as well to you and I.
100%. And I know there's a real tension, isn't there, out there of who needs to fix these problems. Is it governments that need to fix these problems? Is it big organizations that need to fix problems, or is it ourselves? And naturally, I believe it's all of those things. So yes, I think, I said I kind of joke about in my household, but it takes a while for us to adapt to the concept of, we often think what we want and what we need is the same thing. Rarely is that the case. The best example of that is children, right? If you take a child into a supermarket, there's a lot of things they'll say they need. Peel back the layers, it's just what they want, and 5 minutes later they're not even thinking about it. So when we're offered the next replacement phone, I mean, this is getting a bit battered, this phone, I won't lie, but it's an iPhone 8, right? We're up to what, iPhone 14? I could have had a replacement every couple of years. I could have had 3 or 4 phones in between now, but I'm going to try and keep this one running as long as possible. Same with this laptop. People assume that a laptop might have a life of 3 to 4 years. Some organizations replace them every 2. Think about that. But upgrading the memory, making sure you delete the data, there's lots you can do as an individual, like even switching how you use applications, using dark mode. I don't know if you're familiar with dark mode. Switching applications to dark mode saves electricity, making sure you shut it down properly at the end of the day, not leaving it on standby. They sound like small things, and we can say, oh, surely it's up to someone else to fix those. But I think it's a mindset. I think if we change our mindset to, I only take what I need. And if I do need it, can I get it in a way that's not brand new? It's not virgin materials that have been taken out of the ground. How long do I need it for? Could I just rent it? Could I borrow it? How do we bring those things into our mindset every day? Because then we'll find them easier to put them into our mindset when we get into organizations, and it'll make the job of governments easier in terms of pushing organizations and incentivizing behaviors, because they can see those behaviors happening in society. So yes, in short, I do believe that. And I think there's loads of ways we can do it that don't massively degrade our quality of life. I mean, how much does my quality of life change because I haven't replaced my phone? Okay, are my pictures quite as perfect as the next person's? Has that really impacted me? No, it hasn't. So we have to challenge ourselves on wants and needs. And some of it's tricky, like I love to travel. So, squaring that one, and particularly far-flung places that not many people go to, that's a real passion of mine. So how do I minimize that? Or do I do it less? When I go, do I go for longer rather than doing more flights? When I go there, what can I do to try and balance that? How do I balance that in the rest of my year by flying less and traveling more by train and public transport? If we all did a little, it will make a lot seem a lot less. If none of us do a little, then it's just a mountain, and it'll be extremely difficult for us all to climb.
It absolutely will be a huge challenge. And just in closing, there was a statistic that I heard you mention the other day about the amount of water used when making laptops here. And I wondered if you'd just say a little bit for those watching, because I think it really brought home to me the challenge, and I was shocked. So I just wanted you to explain a little more on that.
Yeah, of course, in sustainability terms, we talk a lot about carbon, but there are lots of other impacts from IT. Yeah, so the estimate used for how much water is created to create laptops is just under 200,000 litres. And when we say use, I think a lot of people go, well, you use it and then you clean all the water and you have it back. Well, no. Part of the problem with technology is we use lots of poisonous chemicals, heavy metals and stuff that actually water is no longer usable. It's not very easy at all to turn that water back into something that you can use, let alone drink. But the big picture, if I can just bring it back to carbon, is that carbon's one of the fastest growing emission streams. And every bit of technology has a really big footprint, and that all comes down really to the extraction process. So think about, we were talking about laptops there. You're clearing hectares and the hectares of forest, our natural buffer to suck carbon back out, and then you're firing that water at the soil to get access to tiny little bits of metals and minerals. So that's where the water comes in. But that whole mining process, the extraction, and then the manufacture, and then the complicated transportation of technology creates a massive footprint. So in carbon terms, in water terms, in biodiversity, in soil erosion, IT is largely extracted and built in places we don't see, but we consume. It's not totally polarized. There's this whole sort of global north, global south going on, particularly from extraction. But 14% of global emissions will come from IT by 2040. 14. That's more than cement and steel combined. So we can't ignore IT when we think about climate change. We can't ignore IT in sustainability terms.
Got a big challenge, but it's through interventions, as you say, collaborating and taking on that challenge now that we're going to achieve some things and make a difference. So, Anthony, thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you are. Please do check out Circularity First, and we will make sure we post a link to the sustainability guy as well in the chat below. Anthony, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.